Welcome and thank you for choosing this international business course. I'm your instructor Samina Haq and I'll be guiding you through this entire course. I'm an academic as well as an entrepreneur. Now this course is primarily aimed towards people who have never studied international business before. We'll be covering some of the most basic and common terms, terminologies and concepts surrounding international business. By the end of this course, you will have a good idea of what's international business, what strategies businesses use, and various organizations that can affect international business. When you start the course, you can see various sections under the course content. It's not compulsory, but I would certainly recommend you to follow the order. If you follow the order of the different sections, you'll find it easier to grasp various topics. Under the description part of this course, you will find the course outline, which basically includes all the topics that we will be covering in this course. You can go through it in order to have a better understanding. Please note, in the lecture, you have the option of changing the speed in which you will see it. So if you feel that you would want the lecture to go faster or a bit slower, you can do so using this option underneath your screen. At the end of each section, you will see a quiz. The quiz is related to the topic covered in that specific section. I would recommend you to complete those quizzes, and the quiz is quite simple and it will help you assess your understanding of that specific topic. As for reviews, you will be prompted to leave a review throughout the course as you progress through it. You can drop a review whenever you feel like. I can suggest to you to give it at the end of the course once you have a better understanding of how the course is like and what you feel about it. As for the certificate, you will see an automated email from Udemy once you are done with the course. That is, you have 100% completed the entire course. Now good luck with this course and thank you again for choosing this course. Welcome to this lecture. Before we start the course, let's understand why international business is important. An understanding of international business can open up new opportunities while allowing you to understand different types of culture. The study of international business will also allow you to understand about regional corporations, economic systems, and market entry strategies applicable in international business. In simple words, international business involves studying firms that operate across national borders and engages in international trade or investment. If you want to study international business, you need to know about globalization. Now, what exactly is globalization? Over the past few decades, there has been a significant increase in international trade and investment, and globalization refers to this process of international trade. Globalization is a process that has led to more interaction and integration amongst countries. The barriers of cross-border trade and investment has also reduced significantly over the years, further helping globalization. Technological advancements of transportation and telecommunications has also helped globalization by reducing the perceived distance amongst countries. Apart from this, it's also argued that material culture is starting to look similar in different parts of the world. In addition to this, globalization has also allowed companies with cost minimization or quality maximization, which we will discuss in a short while again. The two most common terms in globalization are globalization of markets and the globalization of production. Globalization of markets merely means geographically separate and distinct national markets are turning into one huge global marketplace. Now the big question is why? As I mentioned before, trade barriers have reduced significantly compared to 5 decades ago, making it easier for companies to sell in different countries. Apart from this, as we saw before, material tastes and preferences of customers have become quite similar. although they may not be the same. In addition to this, companies are also offering similar products in different parts of the world. If we look at companies such as Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Apple, or even Pepsi, you'll notice that they are providing a lot of similar products in different parts of the world, with little to no changes. So it's safe to say that such companies are not only benefiting from globalization, but they are also driving globalization by offering similar products in different parts of the world, treating the globe as one huge marketplace. Now let's look at the globalization of production. Globalization of production means dispersing production activities for goods or services across the globe. Our company can do this for two reasons, as I mentioned before. It can be to lower the cost structures or to improve the quality of their product or service offerings. For example, companies like Boeing and Apple have dispersed global production. Just for your information, as we know, Boeing is an American company that specializes in producing aircrafts, rockets, telecommunication equipments, to name a few. So, Boeing is a global aircraft manufacturer with production activities dispersed in multiple countries. For example, a company in Japan produces and supplies a significant number of aircraft frames to Boeing. Apart from this, another company produces the fuselage barrels for Boeing 787. So these are just two examples. Apart from this, Boeing has a lot of different suppliers in different parts of the world. And each of these suppliers do actually specialize in whatever they do. So in this case, Boeing has been looking for the best quality possible wherever it is in the world. The same goes for Apple. Apple's production process is also very dispersed. For example, some of the batteries of Apple is produced in South Korea, some is produced in China, whereas the accelerometer comes from a company based in Germany, whereas camera might be from a company in Japan, for instance. So Apple is once again doing the same thing that we saw in Boeing. Despite being an American company, it has a very dispersed production system. And one of the key reasons that companies do this, like I have mentioned before, is to access low cost structures or to improve the quality of their goods or services by getting access to higher quality factors of production or better quality knowledge. So what are the implications of globalization? Globalization has its fair share of advantages and disadvantages. Globalization can help companies in lowering their costs by shifting their production to other countries. What this can do is create a lot of jobs in the countries in which they enter. Apart from this, globalization has helped companies to access high-quality production inputs or knowledge in other countries. Unfortunately, globalization also comes at a price. There are some problems with globalization as well. Countries where the wage rates are relatively higher may see a lot of job losses. This primarily happens because companies tend to shift their production from these countries with higher wage rates to those countries where wherever they'll find cheaper labor, which will ultimately lead to job losses in countries with higher wage rates. Apart from this, unskilled workers in such countries may also face a wage reduction. This might be done in order to compete with those countries where there's cheap labor. Apart from this, you'll see that a lot of companies tend to shift to those countries where labor laws are not very strict, where environmental regulations are very lax. It has been found that companies do this in order to reduce their cost. And plus, they will not be required to face a lot of rules and regulations which may drive up cost for companies. However, this is leading to problems in those countries wherever they are entering. They might lead to higher labor law violations, or they might be ruining the environment in such countries. Now the question remains, is globalization worth it? Well, it depends on a person's own perspective, whether it's good or bad, but in general, it's perceived that the benefits of globalization far outweigh the disadvantages of globalization. As a result of this, even today, globalization is essential and is very lucrative for every country in the world and every company operating in those countries. Thank you, and that's the end of this lecture. Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to briefly discuss about the emergence of global organizations. You must have come across some of these organizations or agreements at some point in time. But for successfully understanding and studying international business, we need to acknowledge them again. United Nations, better known as UN, is responsible for ensuring peace and security throughout the world. International Monetary Fund, also known as IMF, is meant to oversee economic stability and support international trade. They are also responsible for bolstering employment levels and assisting countries in financial difficulties. World Bank is part of the World Bank Group, and they tend to help developing countries with financing their capital projects. Now let's come to GATT. GATT stands for the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and this was signed on 30th October 1947. During its tenure, GATT had successfully reduced tariffs for 47 years, and it had also helped increase international trade by 8% in the 1950s and 1960s. International trade had also grown from $302 billion in 1970 to $3.8 trillion in 1993. It is also believed that GATT helped lay the foundations for future trade agreements. When this trade agreement ended, it made way for WTO, which we now know as the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, was signed in the year 1995. WTO is the only organization to oversee trade rules between nations, and it consists of 164 members, which is basically 98% of the world trade. An important aspect of the WTO are the agreements that are negotiated and signed with the world's trading nations. These agreements are then ratified in their parliaments. And the main job of the WTO is to ensure smooth, predictable trade across the world. So why exactly do we need these global organizations? These global institutions are very important in regulating international trade and monitoring the markets. They also act as the basis of establishing trade agreements, ensuring regional cooperation, and overseeing different global trade systems to ensure that everything runs smoothly and in a predictable manner. Thank you, and that's the end of this lecture. Welcome to this lecture on culture. In this lecture, we are going to study the relationship between culture and international business. The most commonly accepted definition of culture sees it as a system of values and norms which a group of people share, and it's a part of their living. Therefore, culture also dictates social rules and guidelines for an acceptable behavior within a society. The study of culture also includes the attitude towards justice, honesty, loyalty, democracy, freedom of individuals, and the collective responsibility that people share in the society. So right now we just talked about values and norms in any culture. Now remember that values and norms don't just appear in any specific culture. These values and norms in any given society is guided by various factors. Now there are factors such as the political philosophy, the economic philosophy, the dominant language, the dominant religion, education level, as well as the social structures inherent in any society. Now, why exactly are we telling this? Because these factors are the ones that actually shape the values and norms you will find in any culture. And as an international business student, or if you want to engage in international business, it's important to know the differences between these factors because they differ from one marketplace or one country to another country. As an international business manager, it is essential to have an understanding of culture for successfully handling the operating environment of a business, especially the one operating across borders. Hence, it's important that managers have a high level of cross-cultural literacy. Cross-cultural literacy basically means having a good understanding of culture, both of your own as well as of some other country where you plan to do business. If international business managers are ill-informed about the culture of another country, then it may also lead to the failure of the business. Before we proceed with the rest of the lecture, it's good to understand these two terms. Home country, well, home country is the country in which the headquarters of our company is located. Host country, on the other hand, refers to a country in which the company has invested, or in which they may have a subsidiary. In the study of culture and international business, we need to discuss about the 4 important cultural orientations as well. These orientations are also important in international HR recruitment, but we'll discuss international HR recruitment at the end of this course. These approaches are ethnocentric, polycentric, regiocentric, and geocentric. The first one is ethnocentric approach. In ethnocentric approach, the power in decision making is concentrated in the main headquarters or the home country of the company, and managers see their culture superior to the host country culture. Of course, this approach does lead to a lot of problems, and hence it must be avoided by managers at all cost. Because ethnocentrism is so common, international business managers must always stay alert to avoid it at any cost. Polycentric approach. In polycentric approach, decision-making and powers are more decentralized and independent. In the polycentric approach, the headquarters allows the host country subsidiary to make decisions, as they believe that the host country managers are well equipped to do so. So basically, you allow your subsidiary managers to take their own decisions. Now let's look at the regiocentric approach. In the regiocentric approach, companies identify markets as regions. Decisions are left to the regional headquarters as they are believed to be best equipped to take those decisions. Geocentric approach, on the other hand, is a combination of the aforementioned approaches. It's a collaborative approach and it's also quite complex because it happens between the host country and the home country. So decisions are basically taken in a collaborative approach, and the company tends to take the best decisions irrespective of where they came from. Let's look at cultural awareness now. The international business manager must always stay updated about their own culture and the culture of other countries to avoid any blunders. Cultural awareness is essential for the survival of an international business organization. For example, if you're an American business executive and you address everyone using their first name, then you may face problems if you go to Germany, for example. In Germany, if you address a senior business executive using only their first names, they might be deeply offended. They may even refuse to do business with you. As a result of this, you should always try to be culturally aware, no matter where you tend to do business. Now let's come to Hofstede's cultural dimensions. A great way of analyzing and understanding culture is by using Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Hofstede's cultural dimension is a framework for cross-cultural communication which was developed by Gerhard Hofstede. Geert Hofstede used to work for IBM, and during his tenure in IBM, he had conducted an extensive survey across various subsidiaries of IBM. And through these surveys, he found the data to identify these following dimensions. During this time, he had identified 5 main dimensions, which are power distance index, uncertainty avoidance index, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. However, in the year 2010, after finding more information through new research, a 6th dimension was added. This is now called indulgence versus restraint. All of these attributes are scored from 1 to 100, with 1 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. Now, if you are an international business manager and you want to know more about a particular country, you are more than welcome to visit Geert Hofstede's own website, which lists various countries according to these dimensions. I'll leave the address of that website in the reference section of this course, which you will find in the form of a file at the end of this course. Now you need to understand one important aspect of understanding culture that is very important for international business negotiations. If you want to succeed in international business negotiation, an awareness of culture is absolutely crucial. A business manager must always be aware of the culture of all the parties involved in the negotiation process. Failure to do so may cause problems for all the parties involved. Thank you, and that's the end of this lecture. Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about economic systems, their types, and how they can affect the international business operations. So what exactly is an economic system? An economic system is the way in which a government or a society distributes resources, goods, and services in the specific geographic region. The economic system of a country also helps in allocating the factors of production, that is land, labor, capital, and enterprise, and hence it's important for the study of international business. We can broadly identify 3 different types of economic systems: market, mixed, and planned economic systems. In market-based economic system, the production activities are privately owned. That means goods and services that are produced is not planned by the government. Instead, it is planned by private organizations. The market dynamics are determined through the interaction of demand and supply. For this market system to work, the supply must not be restricted. However, monopoly must also be avoided at all costs. If the government thinks that a particular sector may be enjoying a monopoly, then the government may intervene in order to ensure a free and fair competition in the market. A key advantage of a market-based economic system is that it encourages innovation and also allows entrepreneurs to do business, allowing them to make significant amount of profits. Now let's come to the second form of economy, the command-based system or a planned economic system. In the command-based economic system, the government decides which goods and services the company will produce, the quantity, as well as the price which will be charged. The command economy is based on a collectivist culture, which focuses on the collective good of the society. When a country is a pure command economy, all businesses tend to be state-owned. Some of the examples of this includes Cuba, North Korea, former Soviet Union as well. China had also followed a command economy, but since then it has now moved to a mixed economic form. The third type of economic system is a mix between a market-based economic system and a command economy. The mixed market economy ranges somewhere between these two, since some sectors have private ownership, whereas some sectors are controlled by the government. Countries like France, UK, Sweden were mixed economies until the 1980s. However, since then extensive privatization has occurred in all countries, which means a lot of government-owned organizations have now switched to private ownership. You need to remember that usually in mixed market as well as market economies, these countries tend to have a more individualistic approach in business as well as in the society. Whereas in the command-based economic system, the government tends to have a very collectivist approach, which means they tend to think about the greater good of the society and its people. Now, what about international business? In order to expand and engage in international business, all international business managers must be aware about the economic system that they will be facing in any specific country. Obviously, if you are an international business manager, you need to know that you cannot enter countries that have command-based economic systems, because all the organizations are controlled and created by the government. You should be always aiming for an economy that either has a mixed economic system or a market-based economic system, because such economies will allow you to make significant amounts of profits, do entrepreneurship, as well as do various innovative things. Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we'll look at the different market intervention mechanisms used by the government and the reasons to do so. Traditionally, in free trade, the market is self-regulated by the interactions of demand and supply. The citizens are also allowed to buy from or sell to any countries they wish to do so. However, in reality, countries are nominally committed to free trade, and the government does intervene to protect the interest of important groups in their respective countries. So now we are going to look at the various mechanisms used by governments for market intervention. The first one is tariffs. Tariffs are imposed by the government on imported goods to increase the price and to make it less favorable to customers. You will come across two different types of tariffs. A specific tariff, which is imposed as a fixed amount for each unit of good imported. For example, if the government says that they are going to impose a $300 tax or tariff on per ton of imported sugar, that's a specific tariff. On the other hand, ad valorem tariff means a tax is imposed as a specific percentage on the imported goods. For example, in the case of an ad valorem tax, the government may state that they'll impose a 10% tax on each ton of sugar. So why impose tariffs? Imposing tariffs helps generate revenue for the government. It also discourages people from buying imported goods and instead helping local producers, as some customers may be discouraged from buying expensive products and instead switching to cheaper local alternatives. However, you need to remember that tariffs are detrimental to international trade and make it less efficient. They can also deteriorate political relations. For example, US announced in 2020 that they may impose additional tariffs on EU goods worth $3.1 billion, which will include anything starting from German beer to French sweaters. However, Brussels has criticized it as a grave threat and said it will make things worse, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. You can find more details on this article at the end of this course in the reference section. Apart from this, US is also considering reimposing tariffs on Canadian aluminum since the exports have increased in the US. So whether they impose it or not, we'll have to see it in the future. You do need to remember that US is taking these steps in order to protect their own local producers. Now let's look at the second method, subsidies. Subsidies is another method of intervention used by the governments. Subsidies can either be financial or non-financial assistance given by the government to help local producers or to help an ailing sector of a country. By doing so, local producers can better compete with cheap exports, or the local producers will be able to export to more countries as they'll have a cost advantage. Unfortunately, it's often seen that consumers are the ones who absorb these costs of subsidies, so products may get expensive for them. The third method of intervention is called quota. A quota means imposing any limit on the goods or services which may be imported in or exported out of any country within a specific period of time. You need to remember that a quota may be applied on imports or on exports related to a specific country. But most often in international business, you may end up seeing import quota more than export quotas. The fourth method is called voluntary export restraint. Voluntary export restraint is a restriction placed by the exporting country on the amount which may be exported to a specific country, which is often at the request of the importing nation. For example, during the 1980s, Japan had imposed a voluntary export restraint on cars that were being exported to the US. This was done after having negotiations with the US, so this was obviously something deliberate and it was not forced by either of the countries. Now, the main difference between an export quota and a voluntary export restraint is that voluntary export restraint is the result of negotiations that takes place between the two countries. The fifth one is called local content requirements. Local content requirement is when the government of a country requires the foreign firm to use the goods manufactured in that host country or some service from that country. For example, this is used by a lot of countries such as Indonesia, Russia, China. If you want to do business in some sectors, you may have to use some locally manufactured products or you may have to use some locally provided services. The sixth mechanism is administrative policies. In some countries, you will see that they don't explicitly have a lot of visible tariff or non-tariff barriers, but they do tend to use a lot of bureaucratic rules and regulations. For example, the US company Federal Express used to send their parcels to Japan. However, Japan did not have any visible tariff or non-tariff barriers on those packages. However, the customs officials used to open up all those express packages, as a result of which those packages obviously did not reach the customers on time, and the express service was obviously not possible. So although Japan did not have any explicit barriers in this example, but still they created a lot of bureaucratic rules and regulations in order to delay their service and possibly discourage it. Now let's look at the last example in which a government may intervene: anti-dumping policies. Dumping is when a company basically sells its goods in a foreign market which is way below their costs of production or which is way below their fair market value. Now, governments tend to take dumping extremely seriously. As a result of this, a lot of countries have very severe anti-dumping policies. So if a foreign firm is caught to have committed dumping in their markets, they may have to pay hefty fines, which is also called anti-dumping duty. For example, in 2017, Boeing had accused Bombardier, which is a Canadian aircraft manufacturer, of dumping their C-series planes. The US Commerce Department wanted to impose a 300% duty on Bombardier. But in 2018, Bombardier was acquitted of the charges by the US International Trade Commission. However, you can see from this example that dumping is taken extremely seriously in different parts of the world. So as an international business manager, it's your duty to assess what kind of a scenario you may face in your potential country, because different countries may have different policies. Welcome to this lecture. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the mechanisms of intervention which may hamper international trade and cause disruptions in multiple countries. So in order to overcome the trade barriers, countries often become part of a regional economic integration to reduce the implications of trade barriers. A regional economic integration is created to overcome various tariff and non-tariff barriers to facilitate the trade of goods and services within a specific region. Such a region is also meant to encourage the free movement of the factors of production, such as land, labor, capital, and enterprise. Next, we are going to look at the various types of economic integrations. In this diagram, you can see 5 different levels of integration: free trade area, customs union, common market, economic union, and a political union. So the level of integration, well, if you move from the left to the right, the degree of integration amongst member states gets more stronger, which means the depth of integration also increases. It's also highly likely that the country in which you do business or want to do business in is also part of some economic integration region. Now let's look at the first type of regional economic integration, a free trade area. A free trade area is the most common form of regional economic integration which takes place between 2 or more countries. The main aim of this agreement is to reduce tariff and non-tariff trade barriers amongst the member states. The members of this agreement may have a common policy for the member countries, however, a different external policy for the non-member states. Some famous example includes NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which was signed between North America, Canada, and Mexico in the year 1994, or the European Free Trade Association, or EFTA, which was signed in the year 1960. The NAFTA will be getting a revamp in the year 2020. NAFTA will now be called United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, which is supposed to come into effect from the 1st of July 2020. The second form is the customs union. In a customs union, the member states eliminate trade barriers and also adopt a common external trade policy, or common external tariff for all the non-member countries. Examples: such countries have been found to have eliminated all trade barriers and imposed a common external tariff for the non-member countries. Some example includes Andean Community, which has 4 full members such as Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, or the Caribbean Community. The third way of integration is called a common market. A common market has all the features of a customs union and a free trade area, in that it does not have any trade barriers amongst the member states, adopts a common external policy or a common external tariff for the non-members. In addition, they also allow the free movement of the factors of production, including capital, goods, services, and also people. An example of a common market is Mercosur, whose members are Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The fourth method of an economic integration is an economic union. An economic union is a trade bloc which has no trade barriers amongst the member states. All members have a common external trade policy, and all factors of production and people can roam around freely. In addition, an economic union also has a single common currency, which forms part of the monetary and the fiscal policy. A prime example of an economic union is the European Union, which has adopted a single currency and has similar monetary and fiscal policies. Now, the most integrated method or the most integrated form of regional economic integration is a political union. A political union, international business, includes all the features of an economic union, plus it also includes a common political body, which oversees the economic, foreign, and social policy of all its members. The EU is on its way to become a partial political union at least, thanks to the existence of the European Parliament, the Council of Ministers, the European Council, and the Court of Justice, to name a few. The capital of European Union is also Brussels. So you can see that the unification has increased significantly in European Union compared to the rest of the trading blocs. So it's safe to say that it is now moving towards a political union. So how does all of this affect international business? As an international business manager, you must be aware whether your home country or your host country is part of any regional economic cooperation. Because if you are part of such a trade bloc, your company can get access to a larger market. In addition to this, you'll also enjoy free movement of the factors of production, which means obviously you'll get access to different kinds of factors of production within a larger market. However, you also need to understand that although from a business perspective or from the perspective of an international business manager, having a larger market is obviously very lucrative for you, because that means you'll have access to more customers. But on the flip side, this also means that now you're going to face even greater competition, because companies from other countries will also have access to your own market. However, we cannot deny the fact that regional economic integration has facilitated trade to some extent in different parts of the world. Thank you, and that's the end of this lecture. Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we'll discuss about different business expansion modes. Before a country expands to a foreign country, they need to consider some important things first, such as choosing a specific country and the scale in which they plan to expand. Apart from this, the company should also decide a relevant entry mode or consider strategic alliances. The choice of entry mode is also influenced by the risks the company is willing to undertake. Prior to choosing a specific entry method, a company should consider a number of factors. For instance, political stability, economic stability, trade barriers, and costs of entering, and whether it aligns with the firm's strategy or not. Only then should they consider any specific foreign market for expanding their international business. Ideally, for international expansion, a country must be chosen based on its prospects of long-term profit generation. In general, a business manager must select a country with a stable political environment that has a free market economic system and which enjoys a relatively low inflation rate. A manager must also consider the timing of entering the market, that is, whether they are first movers or foreign firms have already established themselves in that specific country. Once a company chooses a foreign market, Next, they'll need to decide the entry mode that they'll use. Now we'll look at 6 of the common entry modes that companies may use. Each has its own set of advantages and disadvantages. Exporting. In simple words, exporting means producing goods in one country and selling them in another country. The person selling is called the exporter and the person buying it in another country is the importer. An advantage of this method is the relatively low capital expenditure and risks involved. However, do remember that a firm may face high transport costs and also various tariffs while selling in foreign markets. The second method is turnkey projects. In a turnkey project, the contractor designs, constructs, and then hands over the final key to the owner of the project. It is especially found in complex and expensive production requirements and industries such as metal refining, pharmaceutical, petroleum refining, construction, power plants, to name a few. A third method is licensing. Licensing primarily deals with intangible or intellectual property, where the licensor grants rights to the licensee and in return takes a royalty fee. Licensing is a lucrative option, especially if a firm wants to enter a foreign market without making major investments or taking significant risks. This is also ideal to overcome investment barriers in foreign markets or avoid volatile, unfamiliar foreign markets. The problem of this method is that it does not give strong control to the licensor to oversee operations in other countries. Apart from this, a company may have to give out their valuable know-how to the licensee, which may or may not lead to exploitation. Some examples include copyrights, trademarks, patents, formulas, processes for a specific period of time. Now let's come to franchising. Franchising is a more complex form of entering a foreign market compared to a license. A license also plays an important role in franchising. Well, you can also say that franchising is a more complex form of a license. But in franchising, a franchisor allows the franchisee to use the intellectual property, but it also requires the franchisee to abide by a strict set of rules and regulations given by the franchisor. In return, the franchisor takes a royalty fee and often exercises significant control over the franchisee's operation. The advantages of franchising is obviously it's quite similar to a license, in that as a firm you do not need to make significant investments in order to enter any specific country. Apart from this, you also get technological know-how and a better understanding of the culture of a specific country. However, a disadvantage of franchising is that you may not have total control over the quality of the good or service that your franchisee will produce, as a result of which, if there are any problems, the franchisor may have to suffer or the reputation may be hampered. A very famous example of franchising is McDonald's. Next, let's look at the fifth method of entering a foreign market. That is by creating a joint venture. So in a joint venture, you can create a firm in a foreign country with a foreign company. It can have 2 or more companies involved. This international joint venture can be created due to strategic purposes leading to a strategic alliance. When a firm uses a joint venture to enter a foreign market, they can use their partner's expertise, know-how about the local market culture as well as the political environment. A joint venture can also help a company share the costs involved of setting up in a new country. A major drawback of joint venture involves handing over technology or other know-how to the partner firm. Apart from this, if you enter into a joint venture, it's quite likely that you may have to lose some control over that operations, because obviously you'll be sharing a company's operations with some other company. in a foreign market. The last option that we are going to look at is called a wholly owned subsidiary. A wholly owned subsidiary involves a foreign direct investment in the foreign market, which basically means owning 100% of a company. Now, a company may either enter through acquiring a firm in the foreign market or opting for a greenfield investment. A greenfield investment means starting a company from scratch. An advantage of a wholly owned subsidiary is that it keeps the technological know-how and the trade secrets safe. Apart from this, you also have total control over the operations and can maintain strict quality. However, this is the most expensive method of going international. So if you want to have a wholly owned subsidiary, you may have to give the highest amount of investment compared to the 5 different methods that we just discussed. Now, if you are an international business manager, which method would you actually choose? Now, your choice should depend on the budget that you have, the risk that you are willing to undertake, and what kind of foreign market you are willing to enter. Welcome to this lecture. Strategies are an important part of a business. It lays down actions that managers take in order to fulfill the goals and objectives of an organization. As a business organization, the strategy of a firm must focus on creating more profits for its shareholders and to give them a high consistent rate of return. When a firm decides to go international, they must choose a strategy that balances this commitment towards cost minimization and local responsiveness. When a firm goes international, it faces an increasing pressure of reducing costs, but at the same time, they are also expected to be locally responsive. But if a firm wants to be locally responsive, they need to adhere to a diverse set of requirements that vary from country to country, and which includes consumer tastes, government requirements and policies, distribution methods, and the competitive environment. Hence, locally responsive behavior leads to an increase in the costs. Now, firms often use these 4 strategic positions while creating international strategies. This model looks at strategies from 2 perspectives: cost reduction and local responsiveness. Now let's look at these strategies individually. In global standardization strategy, pressure for cost reduction is high, but pressure for local responsiveness is low. In such a strategy, the firm focuses on reducing costs and minimizing profits. So firms try to locate their manufacturing, research and development in a few locations to produce standardized goods, which helps them achieve economies of scale. Localizing products requires shorter production runs, and this customization increases costs. This strategy is ideal if a firm strongly wants to reduce costs and the demand for customizing products is less in the foreign market. Some sectors where you can see this is, for example, the pharmaceutical firms. For example, Pfizer. Next, let's look at localization strategy. As the name suggests, localization strategy has low pressures for cost reduction but high pressure to be locally responsive. This strategy is good when consumer tastes and preferences vary considerably between markets and it's not possible to offer a standard product or service in every market. Low pressures for cost reduction does not mean that companies will find ways to lower costs. Even in localization strategies, a firm will try to reduce costs wherever possible, but certainly carry out localization. A good example of such a company is Nestlé. Third strategy is international strategy. This is when a firm faces low pressures for cost reduction and low pressures to be locally responsive. In such cases, firms may use an international strategy. In an international strategy, a firm may have an innovative product with no competitors. The lack of competition means the firm does not need to bother about cost reduction. Since it's a unique product, the need to customize is also absent. The fourth type of strategy, the transnational strategy. In a transnational strategy, a firm tries to reduce costs and also be locally responsive at the same time. This is a complex and often complicated to implement. Companies try to achieve economies of scale wherever possible and also be locally responsive wherever needed. But it's quite challenging for even larger companies to implement. Some companies like Unilever and Starbucks have tried it already, with a certain amount of success. Hello once again and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about international HR and international marketing very briefly. In reality, these are quite complex and large topics that command their own courses. So if you look at international human resource management, it's quite similar with any HR function in a company. But operating internationally introduces more complexities for a business. As a result of this, companies engaged in international trade must excel in managing HR internationally. The quality of HR in a business can make or break it. In international business, the elements of HR, such as planning, recruitment, performance management, international involvement, training and development, and the pay differ significantly from the HR activities in the home country of the company. For instance, if we look at the international HR planning, the manager must understand the HR trends in both the home country and the host country. The manager must also learn about local laws applicable in terms of HR recruitment. Engaging and planning worker mobility between the host and home countries is also essential. So all these combined factors, as well as differences in the law, culture, political, economic and social environment, increases the risks involved in international human resource management. Now, if we think about an MNC, a multinational corporation, an MNC can design their HR policies using any of the three approaches, an ethnocentric, polycentric, or a geocentric approach. In an ethnocentric approach, the parent company applies its values, cultures, and strategic decisions, so the subsidiaries have very less power. A key problem of an ethnocentric approach includes cultural clash, inability to get the benefit of local knowledge, or to adapt to the local environment. Employees in such an approach may feel neglected and demotivated, as they feel that their decisions are being not voluntary and it's being imposed on them by the parent company. In the polycentric approach, the local managers are allowed to make decisions for the subsidiary. However, some key decisions regarding strategy and financial investment is still controlled by the parent company. In the case of a geocentric approach, the company takes an act locally but think globally approach. So the parent company takes decisions that includes responsiveness to local markets as well as doing international coordination between the parent company and the subsidiaries. Next, let's look at international marketing. Similar to international human resource management, international marketing means marketing the goods or services of a company into multiple global locations. Increased globalization means that companies are now faced with the challenge to cater to multiple markets. However, companies should always try to avoid marketing relativism. Marketing relativism means that a manager may be imposing their own culture or views in another market. This will make marketing strategies seem insensitive to the customers in that country. Apart from this, if you are dealing with international marketing, then you need to understand certain factors before you create your international marketing strategy. For instance, you need to have a clear set of objectives and the necessary resources to implement the strategy. You also need to evaluate the market size and clearly define your target markets. In addition to that, analyzing the attractiveness of the market, assessing the risks involved, and understanding the level of competition is also important while you design your international marketing strategy. Thank you, and that's the end of this lecture. Congratulations on the completion of this course. If you haven't already dropped a review, you're more than welcome to do so now. As for the certificate of completion, you should receive an email once you complete 100% of this course. Once again, I thank you for choosing this course and I hope you learned something valuable.